Welcome to Worlds Collide. Please comment, like, and subscribe to my channel to be updated on more content.
Chapter 19. Recruitment and Revelations. The compound's rapid transformation over the past month exceeded my expectations. At night, when no one was around to witness the activity, the Crethans swarmed the property like ants, constructing a nest before a coming rain. At my behest, the barrack section was the first to be built. Neither Shay nor I would inhabit the planned housing complex until the workers were secure and comfortable. In the meantime, we relied on our cramped RV for shelter, which Kayari, our daughter, vocalized her contempt for, due to the lack of comfort and privacy. We didn't mind considering it a teaching moment for her, as she would one day assume control of the family business. We thought it best she learned to prioritize the needs of those who would someday work for her over her own. While Shay and I oversaw the metamorphosis of barren land into a secure facility, Kiari roamed freely under Frey's hawk-like supervision. Nightly operations, however, carried inherent risks. Migrants encountered robed security on several occasions and were urged to retrace their steps when cracks of gunfire and dirt exploding near their feet warned them of danger. One particularly persistent smuggler was compelled to observe his contraband scattered across the ground after being warned to alter his route. He was then assisted back across the border, bruised, bloody, but alive. I was unsure if he would remain that way after losing his packages, but that wasn't my concern, nor did I give it a second thought. Anyone else caught smuggling either people or contraband across the property would simply vanish. The barracks were nestled in a corner of the property that offered natural, rocky shelter away from prying eyes. They exited from a single point for now, but excavation was already underway to create alternative exits that would allow them to surface anywhere. Tunnels were reinforced with steel, rock, and concrete to ensure safe transit, and more vital arteries were constructed with titanium shells up to 2 feet thick. One such tunnel extended from the central complex, which would house the nerve center for the entire operation. Our own home resembled a modest log cabin that stretched over 100 feet into a particularly rocky section near the stream that wove itself through the complex. Wells were tapped to provide irrigation to promote the growth of natural vegetation, as well as plants and trees selected to offer a natural food source. Fig, plum, apple, peach, and pear trees were planted, along with pomegranates, lemons, limes, and elderberries. I wanted something that would yield not just shade, but a supplemental food reserve. It would demand years to cultivate, but the end result would aid in sustainability, independent of outside sources. The air began to cool by the time the upper levels of our quarters took shape. The human excavation was noticeably absent since the contracted storage facility had concluded a week prior. The supervisor, Mike, happily completed his business after receiving his payment in addition to a sizable bonus for his discretion. Mike was a humble man who prided himself on his work, which even the Crathan engineers voiced approval of. He and I conversed often about the job and other mundane topics. One such conversation about prior military occupations revealed his prior service as a combat engineer. He began his service as a dozer operator, but expanded his experience as he ascended through the ranks. There were, of course, underlying implications that remained unspoken but understood. Not all of his units had been responsible for building infrastructure. Some had specialized in dismantling the same structures he now built. Grasha would definitely observe him closely from his place in orbit aboard Odin's messenger. Grasha arrived on the cruiser 3 months after our departure planetside with the task of scouting potential talents. While his focus gravitated toward prospects on the North American continent, they weren't restricted to any demographic. The criteria for recruitment were stringent. People were needed not just for their specialties, but for their open-mindedness and discretion. Each candidate was also expected to possess a moral compass that would prioritize life over death while placing the mission above all others. The wall separating us from Big Ben Park took precedence over other sections because of the persistent threat of migrants and tourists. It had initially been envisioned as just that, a wall, but had expanded to include fighting positions and automated weapon emplacements. Most would be non-lethal deterrents, but the manned positions would be anything but. We relocated to our new cabin shortly after the first freeze swept over the area. I shivered in the cold evening air, despite the heavy jacket, Shay, on the other hand, closed her eyes and grinned, face toward the wind. It wasn't as cold as her home, but it comforted her. Kiari even relished the evening air. I envied their ability to grow thicker coats of fur on days like this, but knew the Texas heat suited humans much more than Crathan. The upper section of the cabin was modest. An open sitting room with a human-designed commercial kitchen, separated from the common area by a granite-covered bar, occupied the space. The oak wood trim masked the deceptively advanced infrastructure and electronic suite within. The floors consisted of polished concrete coated in epoxy with swirling accents of blue and burgundy, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Hidden beneath was a 4-foot titanium slab that protected the living space below. 3 sleeping rooms, complete with their own bathrooms, dominated the level just below the cabin. Below that resided offices and command and control rooms, which served as a backup for the primary complex and enabled us to be available quickly if needed. Visual monitors encircling the command rooms currently displayed the terrain beyond, and their orientation could instantly call up any required information. Even monitors in the sleeping quarters served the same dual purpose. Every aesthetic was crafted with the intent of providing the illusion of a natural environment. "What do you make of it so far?" Shay asked, opening her eyes to look at me. The frigid wind ruffled her thick fur. "It's cold," I shivered, despite the Cariboo fur-lined jacket I wore. "You understand what I mean," she admonished. I studied her thoughtfully. "I believe I am not ready for all of this," I stated somberly. "Everything is accelerating faster than I am comfortable with. I expected everything to take years, not months." Shay nodded knowingly. "It will still require years yet to recruit and train humans." I shook my head and returned my gaze to watch the evening sky transition from the distant glow to the nighttime stars. "Not so many as you might imagine," I remarked doubtfully. "We humans tend to exceed expectations with proper motivation. We are recruiting the best humanity has to offer, not the common individual." She reached out to grasp my hand, never diverting her eyes from me. "Common people can surpass expectations if afforded the chance," she uttered softly. "Consider yourself if you doubt me. You have but to observe our daughter to know the truth of it." Our daughter stood erect on a small rocky outcropping, gazing up at the stars. She was barely 2 years old, but her development had progressed rapidly, even by Crathan standards. Her small stature appeared to be her only limiting factor. Her unlimited curiosity compelled her to investigate and comprehend things no child her age should. She already exhibited an aptitude for electronics. She still could not perform the electrical engineering complexities that fascinated her, but she continually demonstrated her ability to grasp simple routines, such as colors and their meaning, along with the dangers inherent in electronics. It had taken hours for her fur to flatten after she had been shocked by a simple wall outlet. "She inherits it from her mother," I teased, looking over to her. "Mostly," she countered, "but her determination stems from her father." I drove out to the Alpine airport the following morning, an hour before sunrise, to meet the chartered twin-engine jet, idling with its engines humming patiently. I was expected in Charlotte that afternoon to confer with a retired Army Special Forces instructor with connections to other potential prospects. I donned a 3-piece suit that felt uncomfortably tight in my shoulders and around my neck, and found myself tugging insistently at the collar of my shirt. I stepped onto the tarmac of Charlotte Douglas International 5 hours later, outside a hangar situated away from the larger aircraft. I was met by Customs and Border Patrol upon arrival for a quick inspection before being directed to the Wilson Air Center, where a rental car awaited me. The attendant waved me over and handed me the keys to a silver Escalade. I smiled, tipped him a $100 bill, and slid into the driver's seat. I wished to contact my parents, but intelligence indicated they were still being watched. I had managed to reach my friend Mark, however, to deliver a message to my dad to assure him I was safe. It was the best I could do for the moment. I met the former Army major 3 hours later at a Brazilian restaurant. We planned to convene after the lunch rush, but well before dinner to afford us a certain level of privacy. I sipped sweet tea as I continually scanned the room. I had quickly shed the blazer and tie shortly after arriving, feeling like an imposter in such formal attire. The major wore denim jeans, a button-up forest green shirt, and black field boots. It was common enough attire that could be easily overlooked in the upscale atmosphere, But what betrayed him were his hard hazel eyes that assessed every potential threat and plotted any escape routes. It was a simple act that spoke volumes about his experience and made him stand out from everyone in the room. I stood in the corner of the room and nodded toward him. He barely acknowledged me before walking over. I extended a hand at his approach. He took it, shook firmly once, and seated himself opposite me. I intentionally positioned myself with my back to the kitchen, my chair turned slightly to give me a clear view of the room. The other chair backed up to a wall division that offered him the same vantage. "Mitchell," I introduced myself. "Hamble," he responded automatically before taking the expected seat. Stephen Hamble was an imposing man who stood 6 feet, 4 inches tall. Short-cropped, military-style auburn hair and hard hazel eyes spoke volumes of someone who had experienced too many hard decisions. He obviously remained active and fit despite being retired for the past 2 years. I reached into a plain leather briefcase, pulled out a file containing a brief on Hamble's qualifications and exploits, and placed it to the side on the table. There was more detailed information available on the biometric wrist tablet hidden in my blazer breast pocket. We waited for the server to take his drink order and return before continuing. I slid his file across the table for his examination. As I stated over the phone, I am assembling a private security team with the goal of safeguarding a private research and development firm specializing in an unorthodox approach to space exploration. Hamble scanned the file casually, as though perusing the contents of a newspaper. "I see you have performed your due diligence," he remarked flatly, putting the folder down. "I am curious how you managed to acquire unredacted information on me or my missions." I smiled and shrugged dismissively. "My intelligence officer is very efficient and thorough," I stated cryptically. "We seek people with specialized talents, but we require security before we can commence development of more sensitive technologies. And your expectations of your security team and of me more specifically?" I paused and smiled while a server brought a spit of meat to the table. We allowed him to shave off several pieces of ribeye before continuing once he was out of earshot. "I expect our security to maintain professionalism at all times. Security and discretion are paramount in my business, but the preservation of life holds equal importance. I feel that those most efficient at taking life would understand the importance of preserving it. I also believe that once you have the opportunity to witness what we offer humanity, you might find yourself invested in protecting it." Hamble considered my words carefully before nodding. "What kind of resources will I have?" I smiled and spread my hands expressively. "A near unlimited abundance. Your imagination will be your only limiting factor." I leaned forward, serious. "I must caution you that my team differs from anyone you have ever encountered. You will not unsee what you will encounter. It is not what you are thinking, but they are." I paused for effect. "Different." "How different?" he inquired suspiciously. "Let's just say they are out of this world," I countered, without actually satisfying his question. "What would be my pay if I accept?" Curiosity had hooked him. "We will discuss that once you have met my personal security," I assured him. We stopped only briefly for Hamble to drop off his car at his house, pack enough clothes for 3 nights, and inform his family of his plans. I did not accompany him into his home, instead opting to wait in the SUV. We rode together to the airport, where the chartered jet stood ready to depart. We cleared security with a cursory inspection of our baggage, which wasn't much. The jet began to taxi out to the runway before we were actually settled. We sat in silence throughout the entire flight, and I managed to even catch a few hours of sleep. I tapped out a short message when the approach warning came over the intercom. We would not proceed directly to the compound from the airport as he expected. We would instead travel to Marfa, where I had purchased land for such an eventuality. What awaited us was a modest cabin with modern human comforts and a garage. There would only be one Krathen waiting for us. I pulled up to the cabin 45 minutes later. Hamble grabbed his pack before following me in. The door had no sooner closed than Frey turned to greet us. "This must be Major Hamble," she said in perfect English, but with the soft, underlying accent of a purr, as she extended a clawed hand. "I am Commander Frey." Hamble stood frozen, his previously composed mask noticeably slipping. I decided it was best to intervene. "Commander Frey heads my personal security. You will work directly with her. Hamble turned to me, shock evident in his voice as it rose a couple of octaves. She is not human, he accused. I smiled humorlessly. I did inform you my associates were out of this world. I assure you they are not here to invade us. Quite the contrary. I positioned myself on a nearby stool casually. They are assisting in incorporating their technology with ours. Frey continued to hold her hand outstretched. To me, she said, are you sure he is qualified? He seems easily rattled. I shrugged. Gracia appears to think so. She swiveled her ears from me back to Hamble. I will not bite, human. She smiled, revealing rows of ivory teeth. Quit antagonizing him, Frey, I said cheerfully. In a more somber tone, I addressed Hamble. What about it, Major? I have not lied to you. I will never lie to you. Respect and trust must be earned through trust. He contemplated his response carefully while regaining his composure with obvious difficulty. I will hold you to your oath, Mitchell. I will expect the same courtesy, I responded, and expect total secrecy. I pulled out a non-disclosure agreement and placed it on the loan table. Read it fully and carefully. We waited patiently while he read the entire document before signing it. Frey led us out to the latest armed shuttle, designed to carry a complement of a dozen armored Krathen. The lines were sleek in the tradition of Krathen design. Each seam blended into the next to minimize any wind resistance or radar detection. The overall design resembled a spearhead. We entered through the open rear hatch that closed quietly behind us as we took our seats. We flew low and fast over the uneven terrain toward the compound. The centripetal force of the sharp turns and changes in elevation was significantly dampened by the anti-gravity plates, a glaring contrast to the original shuttle used months ago. The deceleration and descent barely registered as Frey spun the ship to land outside the front gate of the command center. Shay and Kerr stood outside the landing zone, watching as we disembarked. Shay stepped forward and embraced me briefly before turning her attention to Hamble. Welcome, Major Hamble. I am Miktar Shay. She extended a clawed hand respectfully. Hamble took it without hesitation this time. Thank you, ma'am. This is Ambassador Kess. She gestured to her waiting companion, who only nodded. Kiari materialized from nowhere beside Hamble and tugged at his shirt before anyone could stop her. Hello, she said cheerfully. Kiari, scolded her mother and I in unison. I must apologize for my daughter's intrusion, said Shay as she took our daughter's hand. I imagine you have a lot of questions, Major. We will address them after you have rested. She nodded to Frey. Frey will escort you to your room, where you will find refreshments if you require. Breakfast is at 5. We entrusted Hamble to Frey's capable hands as the rest of us entered the command center. Are you sure about this, human? Asked Kerr once the door closed behind us. He did not run, I remarked. That's a good sign. We must start somewhere, commented Shay. If he proves untrustworthy, we can simply eliminate him from the equation. I paused to study both Kerr and Shay somberly. I promised him we would earn his trust, I argued. Removing him from the chessboard would raise red flags. Then how do we safeguard ourselves from exposure? Countered Kerr. We trust, I said simply. We trust Gracia's research. We trust those we approach. I rubbed my face with both hands. I was tired and frustrated with the direction the conversation was taking. The round-trip flight and the battle of words were beginning to fray my nerves. We also need to demonstrate to him he can trust us. I sat in a reclining chair, sipping orange juice the next morning, watching the sun cast brilliant hues of red and orange against the distant backdrop of the horizon. Kiari sat next to me, mimicking my posture and sipping a glass of her own juice from a covered container. It was one of the most endearing times of my day that I had come to appreciate since she and Shay had joined us. Shay was noticeably absent, as had become her custom, allowing Kiari and me to enjoy the bonding moment. It was a ritual we shared despite the cold or blazing heat. This morning just happened to be one of those cold mornings that my daughter's fur worked in her favor while I sat bundled in my fur-lined robes. My wrist computer chimed, announcing breakfast and the first full day with Hamble. I remained anxious about introducing other humans to our conclave, despite my bold declaration the night before. I drained the last of my juice and motioned for Kiari to follow me inside. Hamble sat next to Frey when we entered. dressed in blue jeans, a military tan shirt, and a heavy jacket slung over the back of his chair. Chiari scurried into the room ahead of me and took up her position between her mother and me. She found the human fascinating, like some endangered animal displayed by its zookeepers. "Good morning," I greeted everyone at the table. Only the core leadership attended the occasion. Hamble sat flanked by Frey and Kerr. As the senior military specialists, they insisted on monitoring him at all times in the event he posed a threat. Hushka sat to my right, quietly sampling the sausage links as if it were some new delicacy. "I trust you slept well," I commented to Hamble casually. "I did," he remarked with a nod of his head. "The bowl-shaped bed will take a bit of getting used to, however." I laughed in spite of my trepidation. "It does require some getting used to, but I think we can provide more comfortable accommodations once you have decided if you want to join us fully or not." "Fair." Hamble took a bite of his eggs while he contemplated the multitude of questions swirling behind his hard hazel eyes. "I noticed my door was unlocked last night." The declaration came as a surprise. I had envisioned any number of questions he could have started with, but that one ranked low on my list. "As I stated, trust must be earned, and since we approached you, we felt it best to be the first to extend it. You are not a prisoner here." Hamble nodded thoughtfully. "I took the liberty of exploring the property last night with Frey, following discreetly." Frey shifted her ears in appreciation. "He moves efficiently, always observing." I maintained the carefully cultivated smile that hid my sharp fangs from view. "Trust still has to be earned. You are free to roam the property, but in the meantime, you will be supervised. My companions will insist on this until you have earned their trust." I sipped my water to clear my throat. "Frey will be your counterpart. She will address any questions you might have if I am not available." "What is on the schedule for the day?" he inquired, changing the subject. "Well, breakfast for starters." I lifted my fork of eggs for emphasis. "I thought we could tour the facility and discuss what we need and what you might require to fulfill them." We delved into his background in detail at the behest of Kess. In return, I explained my own background, omitting how I had come into the company of the Krathen. The one topic that never arose was Shay and I's relationship, or Kayari. That subject would await another time, when or if he was accepted into the tight circle of confidence. Hamble spoke freely about his service, but understandably avoided topics about his officially redacted missions. We knew the details of those missions since we had the unredacted versions, but the military maintained strict policies against confirming any such details. Free and I excused ourselves from the table and ushered Hamble from the room. I was unsure how much he noticed but remained silent about it. One such matter was how Shay slid her hand across my stomach and sighed as I passed in quiet acknowledgement, or how she stopped Chiari from following us out. Frey trailed closely behind like a quiet shadow while Hamble and I discussed the upper layout of the compound, where he would assume responsibility. When asked about where the labs were housed, I could honestly state they were still under construction, which they were. It would still be spring before the hangar designed to hold Odin's messenger and the multiple fighter craft and drones would be completed. I did promise access once they were completed. The ambassadorial suites were of particular interest to him. It was a sprawling complex of offices and private quarters for both ambassadors and their security. Only one section was occupied, of course, and we purposely avoided Kess's domain, explaining that ambassadors were to be afforded privacy to conduct their business. Each section had independent security systems controlled from a central location. I assured him they were isolated from the rest of the security systems that monitored the compound. The security suite that oversaw the compound itself was also quite expansive. The central hub resembled the bridge of any Krathen battleship. Holographic displays projected operational areas, along with status reports and moving red dots that represented those who occupied them. Most of the monitoring displays were dark, however. Where information would normally appear, the consoles were blank since most of the sections did not exist, or electronics were yet to be connected. Hamble absorbed everything with detached professional interest. He inquired about timelines that we could not provide since they had not begun. Staffing, we assured him, would involve a mix of human and Krathen personnel. I explained the expectation of seamless cooperation once everything was online and personnel were trained. "What kind of joint training do you envision?" he asked once we left the central security complex. That will be for you and Frey to determine among yourselves, I remarked. The two of you are two sides of the same coin. Frey will oversee both the military aspect and security, while you will oversee facility security. I stopped to address them both directly. I will expect reports from both of you daily. I want to hear ideas. I want to know deficiencies and how to resolve them. I want to know the good and the bad of it all. I definitely want to know if someone excels and merits recognition of their talents. Both nodded in understanding. So, Major, are you prepared to join us? Hamble extended his hand. I am interested. I took his hand firmly. What about my family? As he inquired. We plan to construct civilian housing off-site, but equally secure, I promised. We cannot have civilians residing here for obvious reasons. The cabin you first met Frey is on the property designated for family housing. You can, of course, select other accommodations for your family if you choose. What about pay? He persisted. I motioned for them to follow. Once we were on the surface, I addressed his question. Given the gravity of your role and the enormity of it, what do you require? Hamble pondered his options as we walked toward the perimeter wall under construction. I need $250, he stated finally. I nodded. It was significantly less than I had planned to offer him for his services, but I kept that to myself. I can accommodate that. We will reevaluate your performance after 1 year and adjust those numbers accordingly. Our medical facilities will also be available to both you and your family once they are constructed and staffed. In the meantime, we will cover any medical expenses incurred by local doctors. When do I start? He asked finally. How long do you need? I inquired with a smile.
I hope you have enjoyed the story so far. Please like and subscribe.